back in 1997, there was a game that was called GoldenEye that was based on a movie that came out in 1995 called GoldenEye, which is based on the James Bond franchise. The game itself, fast-forwarding to 1997, was made by a company called Rareware, same company that made Banjo-Kazooie, Donkey Kong Country, and a lot of other games like Jet Force Gemini, Conker's Bad Fur Day, but these would later be later games they've made. They also made, what else did they make? They made a lot of other games. Like, Rareware was a company that essentially put a lot of effort into their games. A lot of people really applaud them. And even to this day, they still, you know, thank everyone. The three musical composers that you're mostly familiar with be David Wise, Robin Beanland, and Grant Kirkhope. And in case you don't know, Rareware was a British company. It worked in, I think it was Tycross, T-W-Y-C-R-O-O, not two O's, S-S, Tycross. And Nintendo published their games, but it wasn't until like 2001 to 2002 that Rareware was bought out by Microsoft, and then they essentially just went over to Microsoft. And Rareware still exists to this day. But that's just to kind of give you a little brief history if you're not familiar with them. But anyways, talking about GoldenEye the game. GoldenEye is based on, again, it follows the movie very well. Plays James Bond. The game, and this is something that some people don't know, that's actually based on the movie, is that GoldenEye, actually for the first half of the game, is a flashback from 9 years ago all the way up until you get to Statue, which is where James Bond goes to the St. Petersburg Park in Russia. And in that state park is where you're confronted by Janice. Now again, you know, you find out who Janice is, and Janice was a double agent, and it was really somebody that James Bond himself actually used to know. Now, in case you haven't seen the movie, Sean Bean played, what's his name, Alec Trevelyan, and then you had James Bond that was played by Percy Bronson. Now, the story goes in GoldenEye, going back to, okay, there's 20 levels. Originally there were supposed to be even more levels as far as bonus levels go, because at the time Rareware was trying to throw all the previous James Bond movies into the game. Like they had, like for example, you had the characters, you had Mayday, you had Oddjob, you had Jaws, you had Baron, and I mean, you had the Aztec level, which was based on Moonraker, which is a hard level. And then you have Egyptian, but if you pause the game and look at your watch, it says Crip, which is funny. So you have Baron, who's in there, the man with the golden gun. I forget which movie. Was it the man with the golden gun, or was it the man with, or was it You Only Live Twice? I forget exactly which. I think it's the man with the golden gun Baron was from. But anyways, then like the first 18 levels talk about, like, you know, you had dam, facility, runway, surface 1, bunker 1, silo, frigate, or freighter. I forget if that's how I pronounce it. Let's see, you had surface 2, bunker 2, then statue, then archive, streets, depot, which is the abandoned military base, train, jungle, control, caverns, and then finally cradle, and then Aztec, and then Egyptian, and that's just a single player. So the idea is that when this game was being made at the time, that the game was probably going to be 22 levels long instead of 20, at least. The other thing that was really interesting about GoldenEye was that the multiplayer was thrown in at the last second that most people didn't really see coming. The game's fluid controls were actually really good, and the multiplayer is just really fun. Later on, GoldenEye would go off to inspire games like Perfect Dark, which is kind of interesting because Perfect Dark was originally supposed to be like another James Bond game, but seeing how, I guess, EA had the rights to it at the time, and it still gets me because, you know, even though EA makes a lot of money doing what they do, if someone else came up to them and said, hey, we're willing to make all this money and you are make this game for you, as long as you're willing, and we'll pay you so much to do it because, you know, you own the rights to it, because, you know, then they'd get a percentage of it. You know, why would you say no to that? And they told them that they didn't want them doing that because they were going to make their own version of GoldenEye, but as everybody knows, like, you know, Rareware's version was even better. But the idea is that, you know, it's just really interesting how people don't really understand half the things they do. But Rareware knew how to make games hard, and they also knew how to make these games very avid. See, like in GoldenEye, another thing that's really interesting is like you pick up guns, you get different cheat codes, you get different variations. Like the game has multiple difficulties. You get body armors, you can drive a tank in a few levels. You can. I just thought it was funny how James Bond could outrun the tank at certain points. You know, the story goes that, you know, you go to Russia and you're supposed to figure out, like, you know, first of all, it starts out with like these illegal chemicals that they're making in a facility, and so you destroy it. And eventually they find out where James Bond is, and they start chasing him down the runway. And then later on, you know, he gets out of there. Then he goes back to, after he checks in with his, you know, MI6. You know, he eventually goes back to Surface 1, and then he finds his way to, you know, he goes there, he infiltrates the bunker, he intercepts some data, then he goes back, pretty much to get an understanding of what the GoldenEye satellite was implementing. But before he went to the chemical facility, he had to go through a huge Russian dam. He eventually found his way through there. And he bungee corded his way down to it. And then later on, he went to Bunker 1, he met Boris, so he could hack, you know, the computer programmer. Eventually, you know, and then, you know, he had to find his way to a missile silo, and he met General Almovar there, where he had to intercept some more data and stop some terrorism. You know, when James Bond also went back he had to go back to Surface 2 because the bunker at the time, there was something going on there that he needed, something else. But then he ends up getting caught and thrown in jail. And he ends up finding out that he meets a woman by the name of Natalia Simonova or something like that. I forget her last name. And this is when he finds out that, you know, who's really behind all this stuff. And, you know, he finds out that Natalia was actually supposed to be another satellite programmer, probably just as smart as Boris was, probably even smarter than he was. And she found out that, you know, that they thought that she was a traitor to her country because Almovar was promoted to being a general. Now he's a double agent because now he works for Janice. Later you find out Janice was actually a double agent himself, who was actually supposed to be working with MI6, and Janice was trying to overthrow London's MI6 because they betrayed his they betrayed his family. Although they never really show you what his family was. I believe they worked for MI6 at one point, and they probably killed him. Well, killed his father and his mother or something like that. The British government did something to Alex's parents. I'll have to look this up. It's really interesting. And so the idea was that he wasn't willing to let the revenge go. You know, he wanted to do something about it, and this is what he did. But then, you know, he dies in the end because he tried to do the best he could with it. But the story goes that at the point when you get to Bunker 2, you know, you obviously have to escape from the, you know, it's a finished bunker now. So at this point in the game, you know, you have to, you know, you help Natalia out, she finds a way out, you find a way out after you intercept like all the data and you erase it so you can get out of there. You also find out that, you know, that Almovar is probably the next guy on the list. You gotta really go after him and figure out like where he fits in. But then later on, once you go to the statue, you're confronted by Janice, who says that he will, you know, he wants to meet James Bond because he wants to see if he's got, like, he wants to prove to him that he's worthy or something like that. And he also wanted to do business with him. But after he found out that who it really was, Janice revealed that it was Alec, and he wanted to pretty much take care of James Bond because he thought he was going to be a nuisance now. He might as well get rid of him now. But then he finds out that he can't kill James Bond, so he gets out of it. And he finds out when Natalia is. But then later on, after Janice is on the run again, or Alec at least in this case is on the run again, we find out that the Russian Prime Minister, or at least the defensive minister, his name is Mishkin, eventually catches up to James Bond and mistakes James Bond for all the violent crimes that have been recently happening, because it was Mishkin's job to investigate the situation every time there was like a huge act of terrorism that was running around in London, Russia. I think it was near Moscow, if I'm not mistaken, which is like the capital of Russia. It was somewhere near Moscow. It was like I'm trying to think exactly where, and I think it was in Siberia, near Siberia in Russia, was where GoldenEye takes place at. That what ends up happening is, you find out that the Russians had to investigate that because they thought that Alec was, they mistake Alec, but they didn't really catch up to Alec yet, and they thought that James Bond was actually the one that was behind all the issue. So they decide to take him into custody for the archives. They eventually catch Natalia too, so they figure, hey, she's already wanted for something, we have to look into this. But Mishkin wasn't willing to just, because Almovar was trying to pass it off like she was a traitor and that they should just execute her, and he was almost going to win that way, but they found a way to get out of it. So Almovar didn't succeed that way. But you don't see Almovar until later on, which we'll get to shortly. So once you hit the archives, they're in the interrogation room and they ask, well, not Mishkin. Mishkin's somewhere else in the archives. Now, archives are like an advanced setting. Very... So we find out that in the archives that, James Bond's being questioned about, what does he know about the thief of the GoldenEye, and, James Bond telling you because, he went to the actual Bunker 2, and Bunker 1, he knows that Almovar stole it. He is the thief. Even though James Bond also kind of analyzed it himself, that's why he went to Bunker 1. He went there, he copied the GoldenEye key, and he left it behind. So he knew what this, after he brought it to MI6, they were able to decode it and say, oh, okay, so it's an activation key for a satellite that fires like tremendous lasers in space and the whatnot. So that's what happened. Later on, you find out that Almovar had just left Russia, or he was, I think he was gone somewhere, but he was coming back. And then later on, you find out that he pretty much figure out that, he was coming back and he was trying to affiliate, they said that, he would execute them both, like he was referring to James Bond and Natalia, once he comes back, because, like, they're nothing more than a bunch of terrorists, because the two guards that were, they were convinced that Almovar was still a good person, and that, James Bond was crazy for even suggesting that the guy was even remotely even close to being, because he was still he was still viewed as a hero in the as far as the his people were concerned, but he really wasn't, because he was working for Janice. And later on you find out that, which is really interesting, because like as soon as you beat the archives, well, after you get out of the interrogation room and you find Michigan, Michigan eventually reveals that, yeah, he was able to uncover that James Bond was telling the truth, and he was an understandable guy. He wasn't really like want to jump to conclusions, and so Michigan says that, even trusted friends are capable of betrayal, and well, James Bond told him that. And so after that, you find out that, he tells him, he's like, do you need the key to the safe? He's like, and then he reveals that the key to the safe was they had access to the flight recorder of the previous tape, and yeah, and it proves that Janice or Alec was involved in the Siberian accident, or rather, the incident with, he was a double agent with Russia, and, he was trying to destroy, he was working with satellite programmers in order to program a satellite that could pretty much fire a laser that could destroy, well, pretty much all of London. Something like catastrophic like that. So, they find out how to redirect the laser. But first, before they can do this though, James Bond takes it and then they leave the archives. Shortly after, Natalia gets kidnapped again, but this time they're ambushed by Almovar, and Almovar kind of throws, they throw Natalia and James Bond separate. But then later on, James Bond has to go through the streets, but, much like in the, he met another person, he used to be an ex-KGB member. KGB used to be like a secret military that worked in Russia, and I think they still exist. I do think they still exist, actually. And, much like in, like the United States, we have like the FBI and the CIA and, classified military personnel. Makes sense. But much like, kind of like going back to Freighter or Frigate, level 7, there was actually, Janice. Like if you watch the movie, there was a woman by the name of Zina. She was obviously she's a Russian warrior, essentially. She was a really, she's like a really, as far as a handy woman goes, she's like a warrior. She could kick, she could fight, she could fire guns, something like that. Xena was, she was there with one of the pilots, and they overtook the frigate, and then, a bunch of, pirates, they overtook the frigate, and the hostages and all that were still there on the planet. But anyways, in the movie though, up until this point, James Bond would take a tank, but in the game though, you didn't have to take a tank. You could actually run through the whole streets and eventually find yourself at an abandoned military base, which is where Alec essentially had his train, and it led to his lion's den. So, the idea is that, after James Bond goes through the military base, he gets on the train, and then he's got to fight his way through the train. And then you find out that you find Talia, Trevelyan, Xena, and Almovar. Now, technically speaking, this is where Almovar gets shot and killed. And Xena and Alec escape. Natalia survives. And then you find out that they go to the jungle. Well, actually, they locate Alec's base, which happens to be in Cuba. Then you find out that once they go to Cuba, they go to the jungle. They fight their way through everything. Get Natalia and James Bond. They confront Xena, kill her. Then they go into Control, which is where Janice's main base is. Find Boris. Boris is there to do stuff. He was kidnapped by Alec, but allegedly he was doing his own thing because he's a computer programmer. And for some reason he looks like Harry Potter, which is funny. And so anyways, Alec ends up running away later on from his base. And then after Natalia, they go to Alec's base to disable the, because she does some hacking. She hacks into the computer central, shuts down the Goldeneye, which is the satellite in this case again. So Alec has to find another way to fire it. But then later on, he finds out, he's like, okay, so what they have to do is now Alec has one more chance for this whole thing, but before he can do it, he runs to the back of his Control, waits for James Bond in an elevator, goes down it, and apparently he goes down the same elevator Alec does, but he kind of spawns somewhere else. So he gets there into the caverns after James tells, he tells Natalia, I'm going after Alec, so he goes after him, and then she says, I'll be waiting for you at the end. And then later on we find out that Alec is in the caverns. James Bond goes through it, and then you just got to go there and disable like the last secondary and primary and master control outlets of the GoldenEye satellite, so he's kind of like he had backup somewhere. And then so he can't use those anymore. And killing, all his military that he has. So after he goes through the caverns, they eventually come to Cradle, which is the last level, at least in the timeline anyways. And this is where Alec has one last chance, and I guess he had to do some heavy number crunching in order to make the satellite work again. But the idea is he still needs 3 minutes to fire it, though. And so he has to, which is still way plenty of time to find the controls and destroy it, because he leads you right to it. You just blow it up and it's inoperable, meaning like you can't use it anymore. And then you just kill Alec, you just gotta find him and shoot him dead. Eventually you go to the lower part of the cradle, you shoot him dead, he falls off, and then you can, then Natalia flies a helicopter, you do that, the credits roll, and, well, they're in the jungle kissing. And the credits roll. And essentially what it means is that James Bond will return after you watch the credits. So really I think GoldenEye is, it's a really good game based off the movie, and to this day people still play it. So, if you've never played, if you want a game that's like based on the James Bond films and they're like really, really good, I would actually recommend playing this one. This one's really good. It's really fun to play. And it's a classic too, it's a fairly difficult game. Hell, it was the same game that went up to inspire Perfect Dark for the N64. And here's another thing that's really interesting. Most of the people that designed GoldenEye were actually rookie game designers. So they decided, to make a really good game, they wanted to impress people with what they could do. So they figured, well, we could just make a game based on actual locations. So like, for example, if you actually go on Wikipedia and type in like GoldenEye, and like kind of read the story about it, you'll see like still shots. Like for example, like if you go to streets and you look at like memorize like most of the areas, there's actually pictures that they actually posted where they got their ideas from, and it shows like actual exact locations that look just like, like the building structures, and it looks really cool. Like the game designers really wanted to make something like really lifelike, like really realistic sort of, like based off what they were seeing. And they did it by pretty much copying the exact imagery, not in a bad way, but like in a good way. Like they would see like a building, and then they would put that exact building like in the game, but they built it from scratch, though, if that makes sense. It's just really cool, like, because like the idea is that they were going through Russia, and if it was supposed to be like Russia, then what better way to do it than to make it look exactly like Russia, sort of. So that's really what I thought about GoldenEye. I thought it was a really well-designed game, and the movie was really cool too. Even though the movie's a little slightly different than in the game, but of course that's just it's the movie. It's supposed to be different than the game, but it's pretty cool. If you haven't watched them, you should totally check them out. So yeah, again, comment, rate, subscribe, favorite, share this video. Hopefully you like this series, because I'm going to start making videos where, again, I've already made some videos like this, but I'm going to start doing it every day now, where I record a video talking about a game, and I give my thoughts on it, and I, pretty much just, you play it, you enjoy it, and see where it goes from there. Because people like watching this.